In this video, we are going to start working on our contacts activity. So, if you recall from earlier in the series where we demoed the app, this is our contacts activity, and it's available to us through the awesome little nav drawer. So our contacts activity is responsible for displaying our contacts, as you can see right there, as well as displaying our pending friend requests. And these are friend requests that have been sent by us, but the other person hasn't responded to yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this as an opportunity to talk a lot about how we can do this sort of user interface where we have this spinner guy here at the top of the toolbar and having him switch between pages. So yeah, that's basically what we're going for in the next couple of videos. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to start off on is the service layer. So there's a handful of API requests that are going to have to be made in order to implement this. Of course, we don't want to tie this up to an actual production service just yet because we're still in the user interface testing, modeling sort of stage here. So yeah, what I want to start off in this video is just implementing our service layer. So we'll have a handful of things that we need to do. Before we start writing the request response pairs, however, there's a couple additional DTOs that I need to write. And these DTOs are responsible for holding or containing data about users and friend requests. So we're going to need some sort of class. For example, as you can see inside of our contact screen right here, we're going to need a class to represent each one of these rows, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a general class for that, and then we'll reuse that class every time that we need information about a user, whether that user is us or not. So what I'm going to do here is on our services package right here, I'm going to create a new namespace, or a new package rather. Sorry, my C# showed for a second. New, and then we're going to create a new package, and we're going to call this, I don't know, entities. So our entities package is going to contain, well, entities. What is an entity? In a general sense, an entity is an object that has a unique identifier and attributes. So, for example, an entity would be a person. Two people, even if they are twins and they share all the same attributes, are fundamentally still different people, so they share different identifiers. That is, in a nutshell, what an entity is, and this package is where we're going to put all the entities that we're going to be using to interact with our API. So in this entities, the first entity that I'm going to be creating, a basic DTO, is going to be called user details. So user details is just really responsible for containing the pertinent information about a user that we might need to know. Nuke that awful comment right there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create this guy real fast. He's going to have a private string, or sorry, private int ID. He's going to have a private boolean is friend is contact. I'm going to get friend and contact mixed up all the time because while I was developing this app initially, I kind of had a terminology split where sometimes I would say contact and sometimes I would say friend. It really got confusing, so I just decided to settle on the concept of a contact, not a friend. So if you see me use friend anywhere in this code base, just slap me. Okay, so then we'll have a private string display name, and we'll have a private string username, and a private string avatar URL. So you'll see that we don't have any information here that would be considered confidential. So we don't have things like the person's email address. Because remember, this entity that we're modeling right now is responsible for containing public information about a user, basically. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to really quickly create all of our awesome getters. So I'm going to place my keyboard cursor on this gray squiggly, and I'll hit Alt-Enter, select Create Getter, Alt-Enter, Create Getter, Alt-Enter, Create Getter, Alt-Enter, Create Getter, Alt-Enter, Create Getter. Then I'm going to hit Alt-Insert, Enter, and so if you didn't see that, that's Alt-Insert, brings up the Generate menu, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say Constructor. Oh, are you kidding me? Huh. It looks like I could have just done Alt-Insert, Getter. Wow, okay, that would have saved a lot of time. So I actually just learned something new by paying a little closer attention to the generate dialog. So you saw all those getters that I just kind of manually went Alt-Enter, Getter, Alt-Enter, blah, blah, blah. Looks like you could do it all at once. So let's hit Alt-Insert, select Getter, or just start typing in Getter, and hit Enter. And then what we can do here is we'll just select all of the things we want getters for. So in this case, I'm going to hold down Shift and hit the down arrow key to select each one of these items. And then I'm going to hit OK, and look at that. We now have getters for all of our private fields. So that was really awesome. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a constructor. So I'm going to hit Alt-Insert, and constructor is the first item, so I don't have to search for it, but you can if you want by typing in constructor. Hit Enter, and then hit Shift, down arrow, select all these items, and then hit Enter. And now we have a constructor. So now we have an immutable DTO. Now, I'm not marking any of the fields as final because this will be... There will be... some serialization and deserialization that we're going to be doing here on user details a little bit later when we talk about parsables, or however you pronounce that. Parcels, which are fun. They're not. But we have to use them, and we'll play with that later. Anyway, so let's move on to our next entity. So we have our user details. Now we can model the concept of a friend request. Someone slap me, please. A contact request. So let's right-click Entities, select New, go to Java Class, and we're going to say Contact Request. Now I'm going to go ahead and just create this class really quickly. And by this point, you guys should really be practicing these keyboard shortcuts. So we're going to say private int ID, which is the ID of the contact request. Private boolean is from us. Private user details, user, and private calendar created at. Then I'm going to hit Alt-Insert Enter, down arrow, Enter, and then I'm going to hit Alt-Insert Getter, down arrow, Enter. So, really quick way to put that class together. Let's while you guys maybe are still typing or something like that, let's talk about what these fields are. So, this DTO is responsible, or this entity, is responsible for the concept of a contact request, whether it came from us or not. And that's what this Boolean here is there to tell us. This Boolean, if it's true, means this is a contact request that we sent, that hasn't been accepted or rejected yet by the recipient user. Now, the user details will change depending on what this Boolean is. So, for example, if the Boolean is from us is true, meaning this is a friend request we sent, this user details user will be the user that we sent the friend request to. Otherwise, it'll be if is from us is false, and this represents a contact request where they sent us a contact request, this user will be them. And yeah, super exciting. So that is our contact request. Those are going to be the only DTOs that we're going to need. So what that means is we can now jump over into our services package and start putting together our request responses. So I'm going to right-click our services package, select new Java class, and for here, I'm going to go ahead and call this contacts. And I hope no one saw that F there. So basically, just like what we had before with our account, our contacts class is nothing more than kind of a container for other classes. So what I'm going to do to make that very apparent is I'm going to mark this class as final and give it a private constructor. Why do I do that? Well, making it final means nobody can inherit from this class, and giving it a private constructor means nobody can instantiate this class. So for all intents and purposes, this is not really a class here, or a class of any use, because we're just putting other classes inside of it. All right, so let's go ahead and start down the line and implement our different API calls. So the first one that I want to do is going to be public static class, and I'm going to say get contact requests request. Then I'm going to give him a constructor. Well, we're going to go ahead and give him a public Boolean field. So there'll be one parameter basically. Public Boolean from us. And then I'm going to give him a constructor. So to do a constructor real fast, Alt-Insert Enter, Enter. So our get contact request request, or get contact requests request, is used to get contact requests, whether they're from us or from somebody else. So then we need a public static class get contact requests response. And for this guy, he's just going to have a public list of contact requests, and in this case, that's it. So basically, yeah, that's just the response. And of course, I need to make sure that I inherit from service response. So that, remember, service response gives our response some more information about things like property errors and operation errors. And when we do this, when we actually hook this up to our web service, that will that those values will get populated. Now, I'm marking these classes as static, again, like what we did with the account class, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to instantiate these classes. If you recall back to when we were discussing the difference between inner classes and nested classes. An inner class is a class that, when instantiated, is tied to an object of its parent class, whereas a nested class is basically as if we created this class in its own file. And so we want a nested class, and that's why I mark it as static. Because otherwise, how would we be able to instantiate an inner class? Because we can't instantiate a contacts class because its constructor is private. If this wasn't marked as static, we wouldn't be able to instantiate this class because there's no way to instantiate that class. Alright, I just said instantiate like 50 million times. Let's move on. So here, the next thing that I want to do is getting our contacts. So getting a list of contacts. So I'm going to say public static class get contacts request. And for our get contacts request, I'm going to go ahead and include a boolean to determine if we are going to be including pending contacts as well. So I'm going to say public boolean include pending contacts, and I'll go ahead and create a constructor real fast. So what this boolean is for this API call is going to be, do we want to include people that we've sent requests, a contact request to, but we haven't heard back from them yet? Do we want to include that in what's returned? So now let's go ahead and do our get contacts response. So public static class get contacts response extends service response, and we'll have a public list of user details, contacts. All right, so we're getting pretty close here. The next thing I want to do is a send contact request. So a public static class send contact request, and what this is the API call that you're going to be doing when you want to send a contact request to somebody. So it's going to have a public string user ID, which will be the ID of the user, and we'll alt insert inner that guy to give him a constructor, and then we'll have to of course create the send contact request response, who extends service response. And he is going to have a public list of he's not going to have a public list of user details. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and simply include user details user. So when we send a contact, no, I just got totally mixed up. We don't want that. Make that disappear. Because this is just sending a contact request to a person. I was typing and talking and thinking like 3 different things at once, and somehow wires got crossed in my head. Anyway, so that is our send contact request and our send contact request response. So again, that's used to search for a user and send a contact request to him. Next up, I want to go ahead and do a public static class, and this will be the last one here. Respond to contact request. So if we get a contact request, we need to be able to respond to it, and that's what this API call is for. So this API call is going to have a public int contact request ID and a public boolean accept, and we'll go ahead and we'll create a constructor that includes both of those fields. So basically, when we send it back the response, we're going to say what contact request are we responding to, and do we accept that contact request. And then finally, I'm going to have a public static class respond to contact request response, who extends service response. And he will be empty. So yeah, so those are all the calls that we're going to need to make. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and implement the dummy implementations of this API surface. So basically, I want to come in here and create our in-memory representation. And we do that so that when we start working on the UI, everything will already be working for our testing purposes. So what I'm going to do here is in my in-memory package, right, or my services in-memory package, remember, this comes from using the in-memory debug build variant or the in-memory release variant. Either way, we will have this item available to us. So let's go ahead and right-click this package, and be sure that you're creating this package inside of this package, the in-memory version of this package. So let's right-click, select New Java Class. In this case, I'm going to say in-memory... Oh, I almost said the F word again. The friend word. In-memory contact service. Let's just go with a straightforward name there. Then I'm going to go ahead and have him inherit from base in-memory service. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Alt-Enter on these red squigglies and say create constructor. So creating constructor simply creates our protected constructor, which I want this to be a public constructor, not a protected constructor. And he accepts a single parameter, and then he invokes the parent class. Okay, so the first method that... Or no. Before we do the first method, I don't want to forget to implement or to hook up the in-memory contact service with our module. So I want to get that out of the way first before I start writing code, and you guys should too, because that's a very common mistake that I make with this sort of service layer style, is I'll forget to hook this up to the module. So let's open up our module class, and then I'm simply going to say instantiate a new in-memory contact service. And that's all you need to do, because if you remember, the base in-memory service registers itself with the bus. So all we need to do is instantiate it and pass in the application object, and that's it. So now let's jump back into our in-memory contact service here, and I'm going to start off with the helper method. I'm going to say private user details create fake user with a string suffix. Now the create fake user method, not surprisingly, is going to create a fake user. So all of our users are going to be just fake generated users. Pretty straightforward. So I'm going to say return new user details, and I'm going to break out into a new line here because there's going to be so many fields that will run out of vertical or horizontal screen space. Let's start off with our ID here. So for our ID, I do want to go ahead and what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say create fake user, and the parameter I'm going to have is int ID. You'll see why here in a second. Because the first line of code, I'm going to call this ID string equals integer toString ID. So basically, because I just realized something, 90% of the time we're going to be invoking this create fake user method from within a for loop. And we'll want each user details to have a different ID for testing purposes, so why not base the suffix off the ID and have the ID passed in as a parameter? So we'll have ID as the first. For our isContact, we'll go ahead and do false. That's fine, I don't really... Well, we need that parameterized. So I'm going to go ahead and add that as a parameter too. I'm failing really bad at this helper method. IsContact will be a parameter. Display name, this will be easy. I won't mess this one up. Contact plus ID string. Our username will be contact plus ID string without a space, because I think I'm going to enforce usernames not having spaces. And then for the avatar URL, we're going to go ahead and specify http://www.gravatar.com/avatar/plus, and in this case ID string plus $ID equals identicon. Or sorry, D equals identicon. And size equals 64. Now, you guys can use whatever random image generating service you want for this particular case. I'm just going to be using Gravatar. There's services online that you can get random images of cats to show up for testing purposes and all that fun stuff. I think it's like loremphoto.com, the equivalent of lorem ipsum for images. But in this case, I'm just going to base this off the Gravatar. Because I'm going to be using the Gravatar for the production. Okay, so now that we have our create fake user, we can go ahead and we can write some methods. So if I jump back into our contacts, let's just start off from the top. So let's do our get contact request. Let's do that first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say subscribe public void get contact requests, and I'll say get contacts request, request, request. And then for this, we have our from us here, but that doesn't really matter in this case because I can go ahead and pass that directly into the constructor of the friend request. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say contacts.get contacts request response equals new contacts get contacts request response. I wish there was implicit typing. And then I'm going to say response dot requests equals new array list. Then I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I smaller, let's do 5, I plus plus. We're popular. So whenever we try to, for testing purposes, now let's do 3 so it doesn't clog up our screen. So whenever we try to get the contacts for, or contact requests for testing purposes, we'll get 3 random users. So then I'm going to say response.request.add, and I'm going to say new friend request, or I did it again, contacts request, passing in an ID of I, and is from us will be request from us. The user details will be an invocation of create fake user I, and for is contact, it'll always be false, and then our created at will be new Gregorian calendar to indicate a new now, basically. And then at the end of this method, we're going to say post delayed response. And that is our get contact requests. So now let's go ahead and move on to our get contacts. So now I'm going to say subscribe public void get contacts contacts.get contacts request. Oh, this is so much fun. Contacts.get contacts response equals new contacts get contacts response dot contacts equals new. At least I haven't said friend yet. New array list, and then we're going to be popular, I guess. We're going to have 10 contacts in our testing environment. So I'll say I equals 0, I smaller than 10, I plus plus, and we'll say response.contacts.add, create fake user, I, and then for the is contact parameter, we'll pass in true, and then we'll simply post delayed response. All right, so now that we have our get contacts, now we can go ahead and implement our send contacts request. So public void send contacts request contacts.send contacts request. A lot of requests in there. And in this case, since there's no the response doesn't have any parameters, I can simply say post delayed new contacts send contacts request response, because I'm just going to assume that there's no error in this case. Then I'm going to go ahead, or I could simulate an error. I could say if request user ID equals 2, else do this. So I want to simulate an error here. So I'm going to say if request.userID equals 2. Oh, are you kidding me? I used a string in that. I meant to use an ID there. So go ahead and change the type of your send contacts request to int ID. You guys probably noticed that while I wasn't paying attention, or I was talking, or I was distracted, or something like that. Anyway, the point is that should be an integer. Jumping back into our in-memory contact service, let's have it be an error if you try to send a friend or a contact request to a user with the ID of 2. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say contacts.send response equals new send contacts request response. Then I'll do response.set operation error. Something bad happened. And then I'll say post delayed response. So here I'm just showing how this kind of fake service layer can be used to test our error conditions, which is incredibly important. I encourage, if this was a real application that you were developing in production, I would highly encourage your fake service layer, your in-memory service layer, to have error conditions for everything that could go, everything that would commonly go wrong. All right, and the last thing is our respond to contacts request. So public void respond to contacts request contacts.respond to contacts request, and then I won't do an error condition here. I'll just pass in contacts.send contacts response, and we'll do that in post delayed. Again, we do the post delayed so that the UI thread will receive the the response in a kind of simulated delay. And that's it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump back over to our contacts file, and I'm going to scan it, and I already found a bug. So what I'm going to do here is I'm scanning this for gray squigglies. In fact, I can remove that gray squiggly up there. Now I'm scanning these classes for gray squigglies. The reason I'm doing that is to prevent running into a bug, which I did happen to code a bug in this code, of us not handling every single one of these request-response pairs. And as you can see down here, there's a gray squiggly. And what that means is I misspelled one of my response classes. So let's jump back into our in-memory contact service and fix that up. It's actually, okay, so the respond to contacts request, the response that we should be posting is respond to contacts request response. And that's it. So now, again, I mean, I really have to justify the amount of time that we're spending here in the in-memory service, which actually really isn't that much time, if you really think about it. Because, again, we're able to now test our entire contacts activity without touching an internet connection, and we can be reasonably certain that our user interface will be correct before we start writing our actual service layer. And there's so much flexibility. And if you wanted to test this, if you wanted to do unit testing, integration testing, then you could do that. You could even do pseudo end-to-end testing, as long as, you know, the end is not an actual internet connection. Either way, that is that's the API surface of our contacts activity. And I guess that'll wrap this video up, and we'll see you guys in the next one.